Hello and welcome to Thank You for Spore-ing, the All Last of Us All the Time podcast. If it's a Last of Us podcast and it's not, if it's not a Last of Us podcast, it's not Thank You for Spore-ing. I'm your host, Eric Scull, and coming back to the podcast, well, first for this podcast, this is our inaugural episode, Chad Hopkins. Chad, how are you?
I'm doing great, Eric. It's nice to be talking with you again for the first time in a long time.
Yes, first time for 2023, first time for a while. I'm so grateful that you joined me for episode 1 of Thank You for Spore-ing, the show that's covering HBO's The Last of Us, which we can finally say after years of anticipation is a reality.
And thank goodness that it's a good, positive reality and not a nightmare, right?
Right. Well, I guess that depends on who you ask. But, looking into it, when we were recording, I guess we first got the announcement of the HBO series way back in December of 2020. So that, and on that episode, it was episode 13, where we covered on another podcast called Thank You for Spieling. Weird similar name there. We did a fan casting and wish list. We talked about what we wanted out of the series. Would be interesting to revisit that at some point. And I know for a fact that one of Melissa's fan castings came true, which is very exciting. I think she was the first to predict Merle Dandridge reprising her role from the game. But yeah, so not talking about what has been, but talking about sort of where we've come since then. There's been a lot of promotion surrounding this series, a lot of casting news, all the things that we've been going through. I know we've been texting quite a bit throughout the year and a half now, or 2 years almost since this first started. So kind of what would you say you were most looking forward to about this show? Of course, we've both seen it now, but what were you most excited for? And was it easy or difficult to kind of contain your excitement for the show?
Well, I'd say in general, when I'm waiting for a new piece of media that I have any sort of investment in, I do try and keep my expectations in check. I've been disappointed too many times, as I'm sure everybody else has been, when that thing you've been looking forward to just doesn't meet those high, lofty expectations you've set for them. And knowing that this is a video game adaptation, which has a whole different level of expectations and a whole other set of issues that have historically gone wrong with that kind of adaptation, I tried to keep myself metered here. I did have high hopes that it would be a success. I had a good amount of faith in Druckmann, Neil Druckmann, who wrote the original game, who produced both games, wrote both games, worked with Naughty Dog in other capacities. And as a player and enjoyer of his games, I trusted him. And knowing that Craig, who directed Chernobyl, was also going to be involved very heavily in basically running the show. I haven't seen Chernobyl, but I've seen lots of great reactions to it and a lot of other people who do enjoy it. So I was like, okay.
You should watch Chernobyl. And I think was a show I hadn't seen when we've been talking about it. And he'd been tapped as, co-creator and showrunner. But I went back and watched it. It's so good. And oddly, you can see, well, oddly or not, you can see the comparisons, right. I think in theme. And what Chernobyl does very successfully is illustrate the value of human life. And kind of like how power structures work, like around people and the people that suffer sort of the consequences of more of like a higher up, dishonesty kind of a thing. So it's like, it's really like thematically, it's actually really close. And having gone through and seen it, and I highly recommend it. And I think it's also on HBO. So real easy to get into that someday. But yeah, I get what you're saying. And yeah, it really seemed like the show was going to be very good. I'll tell you what I did do though, because the media embargo lifted a few nights ago, as I actually went and read, they gave the media all of the episodes this entire season. Usually, or sometimes it can be just, the premiere, just a few episodes, maybe the first half, but it really looks like, media and press got the whole season, with just a few special effects, maybe not, entirely complete. But as a result, there are already reviews of the whole season, and trying to keep free of spoilers in that kind of environment, although I tend to kind of moth to flame, I go straight for them. Still, nevertheless, I was measured, and I only looked at sort of the more spoiler free reviews, but they were all positive. They were all very, very, very positive, and any kind of questionable or neutral responses were really, I think, tempered very well. So I think that I was just excited. I just needed to know it wasn't horrible so that I didn't get my hopes too far up. But it seems like there wasn't really a chance of it being horrible, especially because of the cast, the crew, everything they had going into it.
Right. And I had that same sort of lead up where I was seeing all those reviews being posted. And I even texted you about it a few days back. I was like, Eric, this show is going to destroy me, isn't it? Like, in a good way, because everybody was talking about how great it is, how good an adaptation it is, but not just an adaptation, how much it adds to the world of the game, how much it adds to just what we have experienced so far over the last 10 years of having this property. And so I didn't read any actual reviews, but I did see the spoiler-free ones that were starting to spill in. And I mean, I follow the Last of Us TV show's Twitter account, and I follow Neil Druckmann. And so as they started retweeting those, I'd read a few of them, and I was like, okay, better mute this for the rest of the day so nothing real pops up.
Right.
Because I do try to avoid spoilers, unlike your moth to flame analogy.
Oh, I go straight for them. Well, some of it,
Right.
some of it's around like concerns for like I'll spoil myself rather than be spoiled. I think it's like a reactive kind of a thing. But
Right. And that's
like
fair.
Spider-Man Homecoming, for instance, I knew, or No Way Home, I knew I wasn't going to be getting to the theaters for that, like in any good time. And so I reached out to people because I just wanted to know some like key questions I had that were like hidden in the advertising and stuff. So there's totally examples where I'm just happy to know that something has occurred, and I will separately be happy to see it myself eventually with no time frame. So I think that's kind of the situation here is, I was extremely excited to be getting it so soon. Now that it's 2023, we only had to wait, less than 2 weeks, and all of a sudden we have this series to look forward to. From my understanding, although it's become very weird to get or to try and look for a show schedule online in an era of streaming, like it was even difficult to figure out what time of day this show would be airing. Like it just is not published in the same way it used to be when things were on TV and when you had to look up the TV guide. But it seems like they're not taking any weeks off. It seems like it's going to be Sunday for the next 8 Sundays, and that's going to be the whole show. So I'm just very feeling blessed right now that it's upon us and that we can, watch and react to it and just kind of savor the journey. And something that we've talked about going into this was, all the versions. I'm pretty sure I know I played The Last of Us originally on PS3 when it came out. But I think I even played more often the PS4 remaster, Last of Us Remastered. And I know that you and I have both recently purchased as well The Last of Us, quote, part 1, quote, for PlayStation 5, which was a complete rebuild. So, this is a story you and I are both very familiar with. And I'm so grateful that actually, thank you for Spieling, that other podcast with a similar name to this one, debuted with a discussion of The Last of Us Part 2, and you were my guest when I launched my podcast. So I was very happy and very excited to have you back. But The Last of Us is kind of our thing. It wouldn't feel right talking about this without you here. And, this is a series that we know well, and we know the narrative. We're familiar with the story. And so to get it in kind of this new medium, I guess maybe could have fallen flat, but I don't think it did. I think we both really liked it.
I think we did too. And I mean, just speaking to our experience with the games, at least, I know you and I have had this discussion, but I considered binging The Last of Us Part 1 remaster leading up to this release. And I decided, you know what? I played it not too long ago. In fact, I think the last time I played The Last of Us, it would have been the remastered version on PS4, would have been right before The Last of Us Part 2 came out for the PS4 back in June of 2020, I guess it was.
Yeah.
And so it was relatively fresh on my mind. And I decided, you know what? I don't want it to be so fresh on my mind that I have, again, too high of an expectation or too perfect of a picture of how things should look, quote unquote, should look. and I could just enjoy the connection of what I'm seeing in the show to what at least I vaguely pretty well remember from my experience with the game. And after having watched it, it really did feel like I was looking for that video game feeling. Like, does this make me feel the way I felt the last time I played this? And I think they captured that pretty well.
Yeah, I would say so. I was surprised actually by the number of sort of first person camera views that they employed that were very similar to some of the early game cutscenes from part one. I'm thinking
Right.
particularly in the truck, when they're
Right.
driving
Yeah.
around.
I made note of the
So
same thing.
there's totally, an intention there, but at the same time, I think a real confidence that yes, it is the story you are familiar with, but it is being told in a way that you are unfamiliar with, and be prepared for, surprises, bumps in the roads. Things are different, things are changed, but I don't think any one of them so far strikes me as being anything short of necessary and brilliant. Like, or yeah, not brilliant. I think that they're all just been so great so far to watch.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I look for from an adaptation anyways, like
Yeah,
there's we're Harry Potter people in certain respects. I guess it could be said.
sure.
And looking at the version of the films that we got versus the novels that they were based on, there's obviously very clear departures in some ways, but the gist remains the same. And so you could argue that the movies are somewhat a supplement to the books, and
Mm.
it's because they're not complete clones. And sure, there's going to be people who are upset about those differences, but I think there's something to be said about there being a difference between the two, and not you just completely consuming an exact clone of something in a different medium. I can frankly just play The Last of Us again, especially with the part one remaster, where everything is like in high definition and the character models are redone and all that kind of stuff. If I just want to experience The Last of Us again, this follows the formula of The Last of Us. This is giving us a story of The Last of Us, but this is an adaptation in the truest sense, which is they are taking that thing that we love and they are adding to it. And sure, they're probably going to twist some things in some ways. And I am so looking forward to the ways that this is different just as much as I am looking for the ways in which it's the same.
And we got some of that. And I know that we're going to be going through kind of reacting to what we saw in The Last of Us episode 1 from HBO. But I also think too, we're at the point where if it were so faithful, if it were an exact carbon, scene for scene, shot for shot, I think it would bore us because of the cinematic quality and nature of that Last of Us as a video game to begin with too. The way that, you're kind of in those just very themes and settings is very already kind of cinematic. So seeing it, get its screen adaptation, it could also potentially risk being too faithful and falling flat. So like, what is the point of this? And I think that was something, that's a closeness that I don't think the Harry Potter films ever came to, like, oh, if it's too close of an adaptation, we'll be bored with it. No,
Right.
no, because those films would have been like 6 hours, in order to be that. But that's also, we're witnessing sort of the culmination of TV as a medium being used for this sort of longer format dramatic storytelling. And so, had Harry Potter been a TV series, that would have been totally different. But this very much is. And so I'm very excited to just talk about the adaptation. And already there were departures, surprises, I think that were just very exciting to see.
Yeah, so I think we should just dive in. We've been beating around the bush. Let's jump in and
yeah,
say...
it's important to set up our credentials. Beforehand. But yeah, let's do it. So, do you have anything for, like, in terms of overall reactions, episode 1, HBO's The Last of Us?
I have a few, and I think they're going to be things that are echoed across the internet as people start to express their opinions. I haven't checked Twitter since finishing watching, but I'm sure everybody's raving about the casting. I mean, everybody already loved Pedro Pascal. And yep. I mean, to be honest, this is the first thing I've seen him in. I knew everybody loved him. I haven't watched The Mandalorian.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so this was my first experience seeing Pedro Pascal doing anything. And man, he's great. Does he look exactly I get the hype. Does he look exactly like Joel from the game? No, I don't care that he doesn't. Does he feel like Joel from the game? Yes. And
Yeah.
I think that could be said of everybody who's been cast so far and who we saw in this episode. Like I said earlier, watching this gave me the same feelings, gave me the same sort of experiences that I felt when I played the game, and that's what I wanted.
I agree. Casting, so absolute yes to casting. Also, having the composer back and having
Yeah.
sort of the music direction being the same really, really, really works. And the show's use of music really hooks me. I think that as the episode sort of closed and we both finished watching at the same time, I was really jamming out to the use of that Depeche Mode song, and really just appreciating that in a post-apocalyptic scenario, there can still be 80s music because I don't know how, and presumably 60s and 70s music as well. The fact that survived the apocalypse gives me all the comfort I need for watching this usually unsettling show.
Right. And you know what? I wonder if that song popped up in the games at any point, because famously this show's initial trailer, I don't know which trailer it was, used Take on Me, which of course was featured in The Last of Us 2. And so I'm wondering how many of these little connections that maybe we don't remember because they weren't featured in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
That's just something that just occurred to me. I don't know if Depeche Mode popped up in the games or not, but
well, it's certainly very very 80s. It takes you to that like time and place of that sound of Depeche Mode. So it's definitely, I mean, but The Last of Us is definitely known for that and like deep cuts, for instance, like just these old folk songs and things, especially by the time of The Last of Us 2, when both the main characters can play guitar. The use of references and really, making the most use out of the kind of music from before the fall of man is really well done. So yeah, music direction, casting. Another thing I would say is, again, the confidence to do new things, starting the show off essentially, which kind of leads into a walkthrough of it with the panel on disease. And, you essentially there were so many things that you could do to win me over, like immediately from the outset. And I think this show did like all 10 of them. And number one is casting John Hannah, who I knew from The Mummy. It was like one of my favorite, maybe my first real obsession of a movie, featuring him as the funny comic relief brother, Jonathan. And, having him be in the opening scene just felt like a sign from God for me. I was like, I love this guy. But also really getting into and checking in with the science of it all. I knew this was happening at some point because either something I had read or, when you're trying to ground a story that doesn't need many explanations in the video games and you want to make it a TV show, is like, okay, let's go further into what actually happened or more of the why or the how. And, that's something that starting the show right off with this conference where they're basically like, let me tell you about the cordyceps fungus and other funguses in general, and how global warming may have contributed to, or may one day contribute to, a resistant strain that prefers warmer hosts. Just a beautiful way to update. You're checking in with the science. You're updating the show for, a modern era, and also showing that humanity in a way is the cause of their own destruction, because presumably that's why this has all occurred, is because the climate has changed.
Yeah, I loved that opening scene so much. What it felt like to me was they were giving us the information up front about why we should be scared about the cordyceps virus or about fungal infections in general of this sort, in a way that we would get from a pamphlet that we collect in the game world. Like I think I recall specific pamphlets like outside of downtown Seattle in The Last of Us 2, where it's like, here's a progression of the cordyceps virus, watch out. And so I like that right up front. And that's especially great for people who aren't as familiar with the game, I think, because it it sets up, this is what's actually going to happen, right? Like we're hinting, but only like we're telling you this is what we're actually going to be scared of.
Yeah.
And it, I like that it does ground it a little bit more. And while you were speaking just now, it occurred to me that, you know, global warming, you have Al Gore in An Inconvenient Truth. There's a guy in the episode who's actually wearing a
Gore Lieberman t-shirt.
Yeah. And so that connection just came to me. I like that this is taking on sort of a global message too, in as far as like environmentalism goes. I think that's a smart thing to do when that's already on the forefront of our legislation and what's most prevalent in the world today as far as like issues we should be concerned with.
Yeah, I mean, we're all concerned about California one day floating off and becoming, you know, an island of its own. And we're all generally aware of flooding and devastation and larger storms and deeper, more terrifying things. But I bet one thing not on everyone's mind is the fact that fungus and fungal strains may be, you know, starting to prefer warmer hosts. That wasn't on my top 10 concerns, and now it is. So thank you very much. You know, like, global warming comes with its own set of deep consequences that have been punted for decades down the lines to future generations. But as you say, you know, it is sort of becoming on the forefront of policy now, and there are, you know, policies being made to address it, or it's being taken slightly more seriously every day. I think it's safe to say. So having that be kind of just thrown out there as, yes, this is why this particular strain, which does exist, has mutated and has gone to humans. That's why. And there's nothing you can do about it, because essentially the damage is already done. It was being done to, you know, with carbon emissions and other things over the last several decades. And this is just how humanity falls in this particular universe. But I mean, that was the brilliance of the game to begin with, was starting it, you know, kind of basing the fungus of the game on a generally, you know, true, generally real fungus, admittedly in ants, but that's even also covered in the opening scene. So it's just really cool to be able to touch back on it. And also see, yeah, it still holds up. And the fact that we are actually currently in the real world in the middle of a global pandemic of different origin is a beautiful companion or chaser to, you know, any kind of post-apocalypse where there's been a pandemic, because I think our mixed reactions and responses to kind of addressing an actual world health threat, which has at times fallen short by any measure, is very much an assistant at setting the scene and setting our expectations for what a fictional world would do to grapple with a similar or similarly deadly pandemic.
Yeah, and then to watch from that opening scene to lead straight into the music credits, I love that credit sequence. The way we see the fungus spreading across first the United States, and you don't realize what's happening at first until it's actually the shape of the US, and then it starts spreading out, and paired with the theme from the game. Oh, it's so good. It's really great.
So if this really was the first thing you've ever seen Pedro Pascal in, have you not watched Game of Thrones?
I have not. I've seen like 2 seasons.
I don't know how of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, 2 seasons.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
I think I've seen most, if not all, of the first 2.
Okay, because he's in, I think, starting the 3rd season. So
okay.
And it's for only a few episodes. But the thing that really struck me at first was how Game of Thronesy these opening credits were.
I mean, I felt that.
Yeah,
I did. Yeah,
it's got to be the same. It's got to be the same company. But it's basically like, I can't wait for later in this season when we're like going to Wyoming and there's a fungal version of like Yellowstone that comes up or something. It's like, build the different areas, the locales where we're going out of fungus, please.
That's a cool thought.
I mean, I just think they could do so much with it. It's like, it worked for that show. It works for this show. I couldn't get it out of my head. It was like a spore had taken root, you know, making that kind of comparison. But yeah, the opening credits were badass. They were so good.
And then just going on into something else that I really liked overall was the set design. And I had the thought, how much was the production team from the video games involved. And I looked just now, and it says the game's art director, the concept artist, and the environment artist provided feedback on the costumes and sets. And you can tell because it literally feels like they took the game assets and then built them.
Yeah, and there's eerie similarities too.
Yeah, and I don't mean it in the sense that, like, okay, I remember walking down that street and I remember that sign on that building being exactly the same way. It might be that way for all I know. I haven't played the game that recently to be able to tell you, but it just, I've said this again, I'll try not to beat the dead horse. It felt like I was playing the game walking around in these sets, which is really great.
Yeah, I mean, when right before Sarah dies, and their
Spoiler.
car, yeah, sorry, the right before that. Oh, was it not clear that we're going through the first episode of HBO's The Last of Us? Hey, content spoiler warning, everybody. We're going through the show. Although we haven't even talked about who Sarah is necessarily. But yes, right before she dies, when their car crashes in the plane, the scene with the plane. But as people are in that sort of town center on the main street and they're running from like the movie theater, that scene in particular is very, 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 like, I feel like they built the set straight out of what was in the game. And I had to remind myself that the people fleeing the movie theater and running down the street, and when you're looking out the back of the truck and you're watching them all run in that crowd of like maybe 30 people, were human actors and not in fact the assets from the game.
Yeah.
I had to remind myself, I was like, wait, they actually had to film this because it's totally in the game. But if you think about it, they were like, okay, you stand here, you stand here, you stand here, and you guys all run like that and wave your arms. Because it, like, you can't just take it out of the game, otherwise you'd see it. So it's like they recreated it for TV, and it's just a delight to see that happen.
Yeah, I mean, I echo all of that.
Well, cool. Well, one thing, I think the next dramatic change, apart from sort of opening up with the science of it all, and John Hannah was great, is really deciding to give a little bit of lead time to Joel and Sarah's relationship by showing essentially the events of the day leading up to the night of the beginning of where the game takes place.
Yeah, we get to know her better. We get to see more of her and Joel interacting with each other and the great relationship that they have. We also get to see her go get his watch repaired, and we already know that the watch is an important piece even from the games. We see the building of the relationship with the Adlers. I don't know if that's what her name was in the game, but as far as I remember, and you can correct me since you've played it more recently, the only glimpse of the Adler or Adler person we get is when Joel shows up and like kills her because she's coming after Sarah, like right outside the glass door or something.
I think somebody comes in through the glass door and he shoots him, but the line is very well captured where Sarah goes like, you shot her, or you shot him, whoever attacks him, and that's kind of one of the, I think, successes in showcasing. We have precious little time with Sarah, but something that was captured too and said out loud in the making of, or the behind the scenes that aired also right behind the episode, it's just a 5-minute segment with some of the creators. They said that, essentially you have to treat the Sarah character as if she could be a series lead. Fans who've played the game will know that she's not, but you give, you cast an actress who can do the work, and spend enough time on her that you really, like, the audience needs to care, to understand, who this is. And it's so easy to care for this actress. It's so easy to care about Sarah when you see her relationship with her dad, how it's, so well built out, and in this short amount of time, you fall for her, and especially in how she cares for others and cares for her neighbors, and the scenes where she's over at the neighbor's house and something is up, but you don't, something doesn't bode well based on how things have been all day, but you don't know what's going to happen, is very tense and very, exciting.
Right. And building that relationship that Sarah has with the neighbors, with the Adlers, adds to the moment when Joel shows up and kills Nana, I guess her name is, because it's not, Sarah's upset feelings aren't just about Joel killing this woman. It's about Joel killing this woman who she had a relationship with, who she had an actual connection with. And so that makes it more painful. It makes it more visceral in the moment. And then as they leave behind in the truck, and I think the woman's name is Denise, who's yelling after them, she just witnessed them hit the Adlers with their truck. And she's like, guys, WTF are you doing? And she goes over to inspect, and then in the rearview mirror, of course, you see her getting overwhelmed by the Adlers herself, which is heartbreaking as well.
Yeah, and it really speaks to already some of the main themes of the game are showing up, and the main themes of it, this realistic scenario where you're really fighting for yourself, and it's just not in people's nature to do that necessarily, like especially certain people. Somebody like Sarah is not going to immediately convert to being that type of person, if at all. And I think that that shows through every ounce of her being that Sarah is going to have, had she lived, was going to have a long adjustment phase, if she would ever be able to live in the type of world or become the type of person that this new world requires you to be. And that is kind of selfish in the way that we see, again, recaptured straight from the video game, but there's a car that they pass while Tommy and Joel and Sarah are driving, and Joel is just kind of saying there'll be another one, not far behind, but he doesn't believe it when he says it, and you can tell. It's just like, no, I just did a selfish thing. So it's very, survive, like, just, it's harrowing. You just see,
Right.
you see what people need to do, you see what people tell themselves they need to do, and how and when and how they are different. But you do care about these characters, and so seeing them struggle to survive and then immediately like fail as the opening whole segment kind of comes to a close is very devastating, and I think sets the proper emotional key for this very happy television series.
Oh yeah, definitely happy. Yeah, I'll draw the same parallel that I don't remember if it was Craig Mazin or Neil Druckmann in that behind the scenes sort of segment of that scene where Sarah is actually killed and Joel's unable to protect her in the face of a gun at him. And then the ending scene with Ellie, where the moment is exactly echoed, and rather than crying at witnessing Joel beating the crap out of this guy, Ellie's more fascinated and like, cool, this person's defending me. And Joel's in the mindset of, I'm in Papa Bear father mode again, without even like really having an attachment to this girl. He just falls so quickly into this flashback sequence of, I can't let the same thing happen again. And I like that parallel being drawn, but I also like the difference between Sarah and Ellie that was drawn by whoever it was, also about how like, obviously this is going to be a pairing that they're sort of meant to be together eventually. We haven't really seen it yet, but it also shows the dangers of putting these two together and how violent things can turn out. And I mean, that's really something that I think hints towards us having The Last of Us Part 2 eventually being adapted as well.
Yeah, I think based on the positive reviews and based off of the amount of money that went into this season, and I think everyone's probably planning for a follow-up. At least I certainly hope there would be one. But yeah, what would that even look like? I cannot imagine. If anybody thinks that this show already is too dark or too disastrous or too devastating, oh God, just wait.
Yeah, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if we heard of a season 2 pickup in the next week or two.
Oh, that's good to know. Do you track that sort of thing usually, or?
No, but I just get the feeling like the obviously there have been reviewers who've already seen the whole show. Now the public's seeing it, and I can't imagine the overall reception being anything but overwhelmingly positive. And so I think that there's going to be some sort of season 2. Now, that being said, we really don't know what season 1 is going to entail and like what the stopping point is going to be in relation to the game.
Yeah, I might, just because of the reviews that I read. Yeah, sorry.
Spoilers.
I don't, well, do you want to know, or because
Not really.
okay,
To be
yeah.
honest.
Okay, that's fine. But yeah, so I think that the pace, yeah, so what questions can we have answered based on the pace of this episode? Well, I'm so glad that Tess didn't die, sorry, spoilers, in this episode. That is to me a really good marker for how fast the show is going to go. And granted, they don't always need to go at the same velocity or pace, and maybe they will, leap whole months forward. But the idea that this episode took the time to get to know Tess quite a bit, and also didn't show her death in the game, there, although there are a few levels with Tess, once you really get Ellie and Joel together, there is not much left. And so I could have seen them really jumping the gun and having sort of Tess' death be in this episode. I'm so glad that it isn't. I'm glad that sort of the next episode we'll see more of the smuggling of Ellie out or towards who we assume are the Fireflies. And that to me is the right pace, especially because of everything they had to do in the past. Everything else that was going on in this episode, I'm just so glad they didn't rush it. I really felt like this was the right amount of story for this first episode.
Oh, for sure. And something else I loved is that they didn't reveal too much of what we've got in store here at the beginning either. I mean, we got the very beginning stages of the infected, and when Tess and Joel were heading towards finding the guy who stole their car battery or whatever, they did come across somebody who had been infected at some point, but was obviously very far gone at this point. And so we have no idea what comes in between those two things in the world of the series yet. But then, of course, at the end of the episode, we get that coming soon in episode 2 kind of preview looking forward. I mean, next episode, it looks like we're going to start getting some of the classic The Last of Us enemies, at least as far as creatures go. I'm really excited about that. I'm glad we didn't get it yet, though.
No, I mean, but the makeup work, my God, on even just the corpse is great. And what I particularly love, so the first stage of infected, right, are like, it's not runners, but like the you could see how the tendrils of fungus are kind of like covering the face on some of the makeup jobs, and some of the people, even on day one of sort of the outbreak, you could start to see some signs of infection. And actually I think the episode played with that very well. There was when Sarah on her first day of school is kind of looking around at her class, there's that kid whose like hands are doing like, it's like a tick or something, like
and there's like coughing too.
Yeah. And that could just be, I mean, it's a classroom, kids are sick all the time. It's like, or kids have, nervous tics or whatever. But you never know where the sign that appears ordinary is going to be unordinary. It's like when Sarah takes a good long look at the dog, and is the dog always as scared of the lady? We don't know. Do we know him well enough? But it's kind of like that actually reminded me of Terminator, of how they use dogs to spot Terminators. Like, dogs always know what's going on. Just listen to dogs, everybody. They know something's up long before you do. But yeah, it's so kind of trying to have like play the game of who's infected and when. And I think that's something we might always be doing or trying to do throughout the series as we encounter people who may be infected, is really just look for the signs. And obviously they're having a lot of fun showing the various stages of what people who are infected behave like, or they will. And there will be, I think, a consistency about it, because there's not this is a big enough production show that we're going to start learning more as a result of kind of what it looks like in the show, of having to show it so much.
Yeah. And moving on to something else, something that I really liked but also was like really heartbroken over, was how they introduced us to the quarantine zone with the little boy walking along, and the way they tricked me. Did they trick you? Because they bring the boy in and they have him strapped to the chair, because of course they don't know if he's infected or not. And she's being very sweet to him, like, oh, we'll get you toys and all this kind of stuff. And they do the test on him and we get the red. And I thought, okay, red, that means he's negative, he's safe. And so we leave it on sort of a positive note. And then the very next scene is Joel has to toss his body into the fire pit, because no, the injection that they gave him was not some sort of medicine. It was not some sort of whatever else. It was, this kid is infected and we have to put him down before he turns and like completely eradicates or infects other people.
Yeah.
And so I was completely fooled. I don't know if that was just me, but I was fooled into thinking that this boy was okay, and he was not.
At first, I thought they were going to have that child be the kid of the man who finds his body at the back of the truck, because they both have like sort of longer hair, and they look kind of similar to me. And I was like, oh my God, this dad is gonna find like his kid's body and be like, how did he even get out of the quarantine zone? I can't handle this, and freak out. I totally thought that's where that scene was going.
Mhm.
But yeah, as far as the negative test, it's a great way of introducing there's a test. And but I did ultimately think that, yeah, she was just being really sweet to him, that they are going to kill him.
Yeah.
But the fact that it was by injection was very, very sweet, that she was kind to him in the last moments, because, in the game, I think we just see everybody kind of freak out when that happens, and you got to quickly discharge a bullet, so it's
Right.
nice to see there's some humanity, especially on the Fedra side. I really don't think we're going to be seeing a lot of humanity from the federal organizations in this game. And already there are so many knocks against it in this episode alone. So yeah, that was really nice.
Yeah. Another moment that really stood out to me, and this is again something sort of additional to the game. What was Marlene's Friend's name? Was it Zoe? I couldn't find a cast list that confirmed her name, but I think it was
Oh,
Zoe or something like that.
I'll double check.
But when Zoe, I'm just going to call her that until I'm corrected, was calling out Marlene and saying, "Hey, why are you being so vague with us? What is this
Yeah.
girl about? Why are you just giving us orders without giving us more information?" And then when Marlene passed her that note talking about like what the importance of Ellie is, the way she immediately turned and was like, "Okay, well, whatever it takes, this girl's worth it." And it's like the whole purpose of the Fireflies, that got to me emotionally a little bit, because it showed a determination for an actual future for the human race, and not just accepting and containing the world as it has become so far up to this point. That was a moment that I thought was really touching.
I agree. I think that the capacity for hope within us all is something that tends to be kicked around a lot. And the value for hope in such a desolate world. I mean, I certainly don't go into the video games hoping that anything good is going to happen, because I played them enough. But that's something that I think that this series can do very well, is show where maybe hope has a place, or just show how it affects people, because that character did do a complete 180. And, Marlene was enjoying her ability to pass orders, but ultimately that's one because she has at her core the right set of priorities, and something like Ellie does not just come around. This is big. And I think that that's been kind of clued in at different points throughout this episode too. The fact that there are worse things out. I think the guy who listens to the radio for the QZ and passes on messages that Joel goes and sees, and he gives him his cigarettes, says, there are worse things out there in the world than infected, raiders, slavers, this kind of things. And yeah, sure, that's absolutely is going to set up the plot of the next season, at least. But it also shows how far humanity has fallen from any semblance of getting back, to order. It's been 20 years. The QZ ration cards, just the style of living is not that of people who are days away from a cure. So I think it's doing a lot of legwork at showing just how rare Ellie is without overstating her importance. They're trying to like really downplay, I think, her importance, except that anyone who knows what she really did or knows what she really is going to freak out about it. And the only people who don't freak out about it in Tess and Joel can't, because they're being chased and they have no time to react. So I expect a big scene in, episode 2, where it's like, well, we got this girl, and holy shit, like, yeah, her wounds are healed. So that's a huge deal, and it could mean everything for us.
Right. I was going to say that I suspect that the next episode is going to open with that confrontation of like, what the hell is going on? Who are you? Why did you test positive for the cordyceps? Like all that kind of stuff is going to be going down right at the start of the next episode.
Yeah, and I like to too, like it can be subtle, or it can be like a throwaway line of dialogue, but I appreciate some of the explanations for certain things in the QZ. So for instance, the scene where Joel is trading pills with the Fedra guard, who surprised, I didn't actually expect to see him later in the episode, but I love that it was him that we saw, but who doesn't want to let Ellie escape. the conversation they have points to bullets are constantly being manufactured in pills, which have long since expired otherwise. The fact that people are able to still get sleeping pills is because there's still a pharmacy, there's still a manufacturing angle for medicine. And I think that is just, just in this little throwaway, it comes from Atlanta, just important enough to show that what we're clinging to from civilization is few and far between. Like Joel asks the guy for the bag back. It's like plastic bags, they are not being manufactured. Little baggies, right. You got to really fight for little baggies to keep your pills in. Like, thank God the pills are new, but the baggies, no, he's going to have to like really search for more of those. So it's just so fun because it feels so lived in. To really be looking at what the supply chain was like over these many years, over these 2 decades, and what they have trouble getting versus what they don't have any trouble getting.
Yeah, I mean, it says something about the world that they're living in 2023 of this video game, that the things that are being mass produced still are bullets and medication. And I mean, we even see Joel substance abuse in this episode. We see him swallowing pills. We see him downing whiskey by the mouthful, like tons of it. And it seems that I think we got some of that in the game, but highlighting that and how he's sort of self-medicating to drown out the demons of his past, and seeing how he's going to deal with that going forward.
Yeah, and just that this morning he threw a kid's body on the fire on this massive pit where they, and that's what he does. And I loved the fact that the guy said he couldn't do it, and Joel then had to do it, because having seen him just hold and cradle his daughter as she died, cut 20 years in the future, and he's throwing a kid's corpse on the flame like it's nothing. No, right. It's not nothing. This comes from a very measured, like, he doesn't do that because he has no value of human life. He's able to do that. He's the guy who can throw the body on the flame because he's been to the other side and back. He's been through hell and back. And I love that it's like such a great shot of strength, and it does show some detachment, but it's not like a far gone sort of detachment. It's just, he can be the guy who he needs to be to survive, but that's it. Anything further than that, like, there's still a person in there, but you're not really going to see it in the day-to-day, maybe later. And it's something to look forward to. And watching the show is like watching more of that, more of his defenses come down.
Yeah, he's a survivalist. He's all about the fulfillment of living until the next day. And the only time we see that sort of drop in him do something sort of less selfish, although you could argue it's still selfish, is in that ending moment when he charges the military Fedra guy to protect himself, yes, but also namely to protect Ellie, who was the one who was actually about to be shot because she just stabbed him. So
that was so good. That was so good when she like gets the knife out and you see it happen, and it's just like she knows that she's about to be revealed as testing positive. And that's, the one thing that I think they really needed to get right with Ellie, and Bella Ramsey nails this, is the high energy. Like the way she moves and the way she's just always pumped. It's almost like the Cosmo Kramer school of entering a room is just like, like backwards, totally just having all that pent up. I guess it could be anger, but it's also just like total wherewithal. Like she sells me on the youth, she sells me on the attitude, and I think it's exactly right. I think it's pitch perfect, and something that I think the show did extra that maybe the game didn't do as well or took its time to do, was show how brilliant Ellie is. The fact that within a few minutes of being in Joel's room, she cracks the code with the radio, and immediately is just like, I get this, you're smugglers, right? Just, she's the most brilliant person in that room. It's like another trait that is extremely valuable in a world where you need to be that clever to survive. But how did she get that clever? She's that young. Like, it's like, I don't know. I don't know that I would have cracked it. You could have given me that sheet and said, what does this mean? I was like, I don't know. And I could spend a month and not know it.
I was honestly in that moment that we saw it on the screen trying to figure it out. I didn't know what those letters meant. I didn't know. She figured it out faster than I did. So kudos to her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was waiting for Bella Ramsey to just speak. I was like, okay, I don't think she doesn't need to look necessarily like Ellie. She doesn't need to sound necessarily like Ellie, but does she have Ellie's attitude? And from the first words out of her mouth, it's very obviously Ellie. I read something from the producers about how when Bella Ramsey auditioned, it was less her reading a part and more her becoming a part. She just became Ellie in front of them. And I definitely felt that. I loved her in this episode so far. And something worth noting, we got the first name drop of Riley. And in the coming soon preview, it seemed like we're going to be getting some of Left Behind in the next episode.
Yeah,
Or episodes.
I'm very excited about that, and that's the one part of The Last of Us Part 1 on PS5 I haven't played yet. It's Left Behind, so I think in advance of the next episodes, I will be going through that because it's short. But that original DLC and how it informs Ellie's character. Of course, it doesn't make sense to revisit it in season 2 or 3, like to touch on it for the first time. It makes sense to tell that story now, because we've spent the time in episode 1 telling about Joel's backstory with his kid. It makes sense to kind of touch on Ellie's life growing up, although some of that was done in this episode. They talked about her growing up in sort of a Fedra school, and then interacting with Riley, who Marlene knew and knew that they were friends and close. So it's nice to get, and it's nice to know that the time is going to be spent to kind of showcase what that relationship is, especially because for a character whose identity, and especially in the video games, her queer identity is very forefront, very prominent as it comes into some of the plot elements of the second game. It's very nice to see that it's being addressed and touched on and kind of teed up here to just really give more insight into who the character is and what their motivations are.
Yeah, I that's another thing I'm looking forward to in this series, is how they sort of line things up that came non-chronologically in the games, but were eventually revealed to us. So we're getting Left Behind in some regard. We're getting other story details that might be hinting towards part 2. Then, of course, in the part 2 video games, we got flashbacks to this time, or not long after this time, that I wonder if we're going to be seeing any of those in the progress of this season or future seasons. And I really like the sort of compiling of the world of the game into a linear story with flashbacks that suit what's happening, but also just like getting all of it at once, I think is going to be really rewarding.
Yeah, I agree completely. And, let's talk for a minute about Tess and, sort of our character introduction into Tess in the Boston QZ is she's confronting Robert. And in the game, you're Joel and you go with her and you learn who Robert is. And he's kind of a scaredy cat and he's like very nervous and things. But like, it's very much you and Tess in a shootout with Robert's men. And eventually you have to go like chase him down. In the show, Tess totally handles it.
Yeah.
Like she's just totally capable. She talks her way out of a Fedra cell, even after surviving like a bomb blast with Robert's men. Like the fact that Joel is doing his own thing and he's setting up for whatever score he's taking with the battery and the car and everything else, that he drinks himself to sleep. And then Tess, who we last saw being handcuffed by Fedra after like an all-out Firefly brawl with the agents, we just see Tess come home and crawl into bed with Joel. We're like, she handled it. It's like, what a great way to show how competent Tess is. And it's even better than if they had done all of those, video game levels together. I think it just really, really shows like it's cutting some time, but it's not trimming any fat that wasn't really for the taking there.
Yeah, I like that. We were able to get her ability to control a situation so quickly, that those levels in the game are sort of our introduction to playing as Joel, because that's our first time to do it. Otherwise we were Sarah at the beginning of the game.
That's right.
And so we don't need that in the show. We just need the story stuff. And so this introduces us to Tess effectively. We get to see how she's able to control a situation and give the information that she knows she needs to give, even knowing that she's probably gonna like turn around and say something completely different to Joel or to somebody else in order to get her way in the very next scene. And she does that, and it's really fantastic.
It's so great to see that, also what kind of a woman Joel is with. And the kind of woman you would need to be to survive in the quarantine zone, hardened, not if you look at the way that Tess cares not about her physical appearance. She's got a real big shiner when the episode goes on, and
Mm-hmm.
she knows Joel will care about it, but she's like had worse, and so she's like, this is who I am, and yeah, I'm gonna pretend like this isn't a big deal, and then I'm gonna get my boyfriend to come kill you. But
Yeah.
it's very like just seeing how competent she was and seeing their relationship together, which I know will be pretty brief overall in the overall scheme of things, showcases, I think, what an adult relationship would look like in this world. And it is definitely Joel's thing that's, I'm sure, gotten him through these years since finding Tess. I think we'll probably get more of that in the very next episode of what Tess means to Joel and what Joel means to Tess. But I think I got enough of it in this episode where it's like I'm so grateful that he found somebody who was as capable of survival as he is, because he can't always be having these relationships with people that just aren't cut out for this stress of this world. The way that Sarah was just unfortunately too pure to survive in this kind of a world, Tess is very much somebody who has adapted, and is able and capable of surviving, if not thriving, in the kind of world that unfortunately exists.
Yeah, and we see the same sort of stuff from Marlene as well. We get to see how
Yeah,
able she is to control the situation, how obviously respected she is, as even though everybody is sort of upset with her around, she gives an order and they follow it without hesitation. Um, because everybody knows that she has their best interests at heart. She has mankind's best interest at heart, and has earned their respect enough to uh, follow her orders even when they're upset with her. And then obviously, as we learn, well, we haven't yet fully learned what Ellie's importance is, but seeing others learn that and how they sort of even even further put their trust in Marlene is really great. And how great is it that we get Merle Dandridge?
yeah.
We get her in the role again. She's so fantastic.
It feels perfect. In the very brief after show segment, the actress talked about growing into the role,
Mhm.
being a bit older now than she was when she was the voice artist for the video game. Really worked, I think, for her, and really worked for us. I think she's perfect in the role, and that's another one of those like really great Easter eggs if you are a video game fans. Like, I know this voice, I know this person. And it's going to be weird when other voice actors show up that aren't playing their exact same characters. But I think that she had some great lines in this episode too. You immediately kind of love the character. She says, y'all talk it over, but please remember that I'm bleeding out. Which also in the video game, she's just always holding her side and is totally bleeding for like levels, and you're just like, oh man, she's not
Yeah.
okay. What is her injury anyway? What is the nature of her injury? It's like, I actually have a sense of urgency here around you guys figuring this out.
Right.
But no, the line of Marlene's that I really liked in this episode is, if you fight for 20 years and get nowhere, you're not a rebellion, you're just spray paint. And
Yeah.
that's a lot of what we are seeing from the Fireflies. Spray paint is everywhere. Another thing that's very well recreated from the game, but the idea that there's actually somebody in the world going and painting that, and you kind of raising awareness, or telling Joel, a stranger walking up to him and about to say, go look to the light, whatever that's supposed to mean. He's
Right.
like, I'll break your jaw. Like, it's a cult-ish kind of a thing, but it's exactly the sort of mini, like, microcosm society kind of thing that you can believe would exist in a post-apocalyptic military dictatorship kind of world quarantine zone.
I love the twisting of expectations, because the Fireflies are at multiple times throughout the episode referred to as terrorists, and so you don't really know, okay, like, to what extent are they terrorists? Who do we trust here? Do we trust the militants? Do we trust these people who are blowing up half the city? It seems, and getting that slow reveal, just like we do in the game, of what the Fireflies are, what they stand for, and what their ultimate goals are, is going to be really rewarding.
I agree completely. And this is a show that can take its time building that slowly.
Mhm.
Which is really exciting. And yeah, just spending more time with them, I think, is the one thing that you can't do in the game. But which you could absolutely do. Like at any point when Joel and Ellie are heading presumably west, presumably with Tess to go find Tommy, we could at any point also be following along with the Fireflies journey, and where they're going after they're leaving the Boston QZ as well.
That's
Um,
true, especially because I mean, without I don't know how much we want to spoil the game in this episode as well as the show,
oh,
but especially knowing that Marlene pops up again at the end, like seeing her journey to get to where we end up later, might be interesting. That'd be a good way to adapt the show or adapt the game into something that's new, which is I really appreciate that.
yeah. So I feel like we've done some really good covering of the first episode. I'm trying to think if there were any major scenes that I'm overlooking. I think that again, just super props to the set design, even though they didn't so like when Tess and Joel go through the city and are like making their way to Robert and back. I loved that they found new ways of kind of subverting expectations for the game. Like Joel at one point moves a bookcase, but it's not to get down a tunnel. It's just so he can get to a loose floorboard. And I'm
Hmm.
like, oh, he's not like it just like totally shocked me for a second. And then I was like, oh, got it. Okay. This is more realistic that there's just a loose floorboard than a entire secret back way down through the sewer systems. But they're just building everything slowly. And I think that one choice that I saw some headlines about that they did make for the TV series that will be a market departure of the video game is the lack and the absence of spores
Hmm.
in the show. So, however, it is that this fungus is transferred, it is not going to be through the use of these sort of spore infected under tunnel kind of
Right.
areas, or that kind of a thing. And frankly, there's already a huge blockbuster series where Pedro Pascal wears a mask. And it's called The Mandalorian on Disney Plus. So I can and it's equally hard to see him emote in that mask as it would be, or in that helmet as it would for a gas mask in this show. I understand completely why the creators would not wish to have many scenes in gas masks, because how are you going to act in that?
Right.
Um, I understand why the change was made, but it is a different world and it's different enough. It's noticeably different enough to watch Tess and Joel go up to that, sort of desiccated into like this old corpse that had been long infected and not be worried about spores is actually a little bit shocking because of what we know from the game. So it's
Hmm.
it's just it's the same. It's the fungus we know, but slightly different and enough to keep you kind of on your feet.
Right. And I bet that's a practical choice just as much as any other. Like, I'm sure that would be really hard to animate in some respect.
Mm.
So I also just appreciate that it means we're probably going to get more creature effects, or at least there's going to be some of that in future episodes. And I fully can't wait for Joel to be going stealth mode and taking out like 4 of the 5 clickers that are in a room, and then on the 5th one he
Oh,
fails his stealth, and
I
because
can't
I
wait
know
for
that happened to me
I can't wait
many
for
times.
clickers. Also, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's worth noting too that you played the series on Grounded, right?
Yeah, whatever the hard mode is.
Whatever the hard mode is. So like this show is playing it pretty much the same hard mode, because you can't have these characters just get injury after injury after injury. Like you can't have them take a bullet. They're gonna
Right,
really worry about it.
right.
So it's I wonder if that excites you, and I wanted to ask you if it excites you, because ultimately the more realistic the series is pretty much akin to not one clicker can grab you ever.
Right.
Not
Yeah.
what you have to really count your bullets. I'm pretty sure we're going to see them start counting bullets in a future episode. Like it really matters. Like,
Yeah. The
yeah,
stakes are going to be up there for sure.
it's very satisfying. I have another question for you specifically about this show. So
Uh-huh.
the 2003 sequence is set in Austin, Texas. I know you're about 3 hours from there.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, how is everyone's Texas accent?
It felt like Texas to me. I
Really?
definitely made, well, yeah, I definitely made note of the accents. I was like, okay, cool, they're doing a good job.
Okay.
Yeah, it felt like, okay, that's somebody I could hear down the street or outside my apartment complex or whatever. Yeah.
I appreciate that take, because also in the behind the scenes video, again, they packed a lot in 5 minutes. Nobody is speaking with an American accent normally.
Apparently, Nico
Like,
Parker, who is Sarah, is British. Bella Ramsey, who is Ellie, is British.
is
And I was like,
British.
okay, everything's a lie.
Yeah,
Sure.
and Pager's got it down. I feel like he's got a good American accent going on. Yeah, it just everything is a lie. Although also it's acting, but
Right, right. Yeah, I love it.
it's so funny to see just how wide the net was for casting a show set in Texas. But what does it really mean? It's like you don't need authentic Texans to play
Right,
these
right.
roles is everybody, but everyone's doing such a fine job. I just feel like we're so blessed to be getting this show, and yeah, they still got to do the jump scare type things. When Tess first encounters the body, like she's the camera pans over. I'm sure some people jumped at that. I didn't, but I'm sure that was what was meant to happen. Honestly, for me, it was the grandma in the chair, like when Ellie is looking at the DVD collection, or Sarah's looking at the DVD collection, and you can see the woman in the chair kind of start to move and animate in a way that she just was not before.
Right.
And it's perfect, film horror, body horror.
Right, where it's there to scare you as an audience member and not necessarily the characters in the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And then, even when Sarah has to witness sort of the cannibalism of the woman and her family, it's shocking. But yeah, again with the casting, like Sarah as a character is somebody who is just too pure for the world. And she like her death at the hands of essentially friendly fire, like they were all on the same side, their humanity, and they're fighting this virus, but the uncertainty and the panic of it all led an officer to obey an order, which was clearly not to take any survivors or assist them in any way. The fact that it's not lost on me, and it's certainly intentional, and it's certainly meaningful that Joel lost his daughter as a result of not the virus, but of another human,
Right.
and another human choice. Like that is so clearly an important thing to kind of move forward. And I wonder if they'll do more with just that fact, moving forward, that it was a person. But seeing them just pay it off too when another agent is about to, unleash a weapon onto a young girl, was all the payoff I would have ever wanted from the game. The fact that this show is drawing that direct parallel between Joel's protective nature. He has a chance at the end of episode 1 to right a wrong that has long been ailing him, and again, like you said, he doesn't feel that way towards Ellie here yet, and as if she were his daughter. I don't even think it's on his mind. I think though that because she's a young girl and he lost his daughter, is like you can't help but that instinctual element of, I think Joel knows he has a split second of thought to right a wrong. And I think that's exactly what he's doing. And I find that very satisfying.
Yeah. And the series, the games are called The Last of Us, and it is about the remaining humans, obviously. But I think that also can be drawn to pointing out the last factions of us and seeing how we're all warring against each other in this way. Like there's the Fedra, there's the Fireflies. We know that there's the cannibals that pop up eventually. There's the slavers. There's all these kinds of different factions of people who all have conflicting interests. And the fungus at this point in this game's world really isn't the ultimate enemy. It's other people. And that's something that is really heavily played at in The Last of Us Part 2. And so we're going to get a lot of that here in the series.
Yeah, and I think that although it's very exciting to see in the previews that clickers are coming, and even a bloater somehow, how could they possibly do that in live action and make it
just like Joel like barrel rolling around, shotgun, barrel roll.
How are they gonna? How are they gonna escape in a real world setting a bloater? I can't imagine it, but it's there. You can totally see it's gonna happen. But like, they still have to ground this with the science. Like a bloater becomes that way because of the fungus, and so like the clickers too. Like I don't know, I'm just so excited about it. But I think that it will be, if smartly used, few and far between. Well,
Yeah.
yes, we'll get clickers. Clickers will be the main big thing on for one episode, and then
Mhm.
I think they'll have their centerpiece, and then they'll just be off to the side. Like this is the world that it's in, because you shouldn't overuse them the way that the game goes from combat to combat to combat.
Mhm.
Although the game also is very well does very well splitting the combat up between the
Mhm.
infected and the non-infected.
Right.
But yeah, I think the zombies, so to speak, the infected, are going to be used hopefully sparingly. Seen or felt more than seen.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, human to human conflict is always going to be the most interesting thing, and so I think we're going to get plenty of that in this series.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, any final thoughts about episode one? Again, I'm just so grateful that you could take the time to talk about this, and the fact that we get to touch base and do this podcast about it.
The only other thing I wanted to mention is actually something else that popped up in the what you can expect next
Mm.
scenes. It seemed like we're going to get maybe some more of Bill and Frank backstory. Maybe it's
Yeah.
not backstory. I mean, obviously there is both a Bill and a Frank in this versus in the game we only have one of them because the other one has already sort of left. So I couldn't tell if in the clips that we got it's a present day Bill and Frank or if it's more like past, kind of the in the same way that we're going to get some the Left Behind story, whether we're going to get some of Bill and Frank's past story together.
Yeah, what I would like for this show, and I do know the answer to your question, but I won't spoil it. But I think that what I would like for this series, and what I would have liked for them to do too, is the game starts off and you're with Joel in sort of the quarantine zone, and Joel and Tess are able to talk about recent events. It's really only hinted at what their relationship is like, and I would have even settled for 5 or 6 episodes of Tess and Joel in the Boston QZ, plying their trade and working it, because the game had such room for these relationships have so much depth and so much room for expansion.
Mhm.
And so I think even if we aren't necessarily going to get 5 or 6 episodes of Joel and Tess, the playing it straight, the fact that we're going to see like Riley and Ellie, and like taking the time to delve into what makes these characters who they are, is something that it seems like they're interested to be doing. So if Bill's story is being told through, or at least partly through, his relationship with Frank, which in the video game way back when was only sort of a mere hint, then that's utterly fantastic to really kind of, and they're not being afraid of really mainstreaming or mainlining and centering characters that we, even video game players might go, wait, who? Um, to tell a better story, or to tell a more dynamic story or more human story, something that feels more aligned with the story they're trying to tell in the show. And so I think that we need to be seeing as much about these people as possible, because they are not just pixelated avatars that we're, lumbering around in these settings. So I look forward to as much backstory as they'll be willing to give us for each of these characters.
Yeah, 100%. Anything that's additional to the game and the story that they tell there, I would love to see.
I mean, that's just it. They've definitely won me over already.
Mhm.
Although it bar was probably very low, but admittedly, but they do it because you can tell that the emotional notes are there. The story is as poignant as ever, even in the middle of a global pandemic. Is like, do we need another pandemic show? But like, no, I think I think they did a good job making it very relevant, to show that it can always get worse for us, and the types of the sort of humanity prescribing their own death here by allowing the planet to warm in such an unexpected way caused this one pandemic in the show. Is let that continue to be a lesson for us, that we really can't take our eye off the ball. Let's never take for granted our immunity to certain things, like, oh, cordyceps, that doesn't affect humans. Well, like one day it might. So let's actually take the proper steps and trust the science, and all these good little nuggets of a path forward that I think can be gleaned from a show like this, and I eat it all up. I just think it's great.
Yeah, well, certainly we're going to see more of the worst of humanity, but I think that's something that the games do and that I fully expect from the show is that it also shows some of the best of humanity and how we can be there for each other and strive to protect each other or to strive for something greater than just ourselves. I look forward to all of that.
Yeah. So I think that's gonna wrap up episode 1 of Thank You for Spore-ing. Thanks for sporing with me, Chad.
Oh, absolutely. I hope we don't spore too much, though. I don't want to come down with anything.
I know. I have a fever, and the only prescription is less sporing. But yes. So, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter currently still at Chadadada. That is ChadAdAdA. I do have other podcasts that have been less than active recently, but there should be new episodes of Crossroads of Destiny, which is an Avatar: The Last Airbender rewatch podcast, coming soon. And hopefully there will be more Cinescope coming soon as well, which is a show that you have been on with me many times where we talk about the movies we love and why we love them. And
I love it so much.
I want to bring that back as well. So
excellent.
I'm here for now and I'm on Twitter, but hopefully you'll see me in those other places too.
I can't wait. It's going to be great. And I look forward to the next time where we can get together and do this as well.
Yes. Next week.
Next week.
Let's do it.
I love it. I love it. Let's do it. Okay. We're going to do it. Oh, I'm so excited. I'm so excited. This is everything I needed in 2023 and nothing I didn't need.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's my birthday weekend. And so like happy birthday to me and to everybody else.
Happy birthday. That's awesome. Thank you for having a birthday so that we could get this show.
You're welcome. Happy to provide that for you.
Cool. Well, thank you listeners for listening. Thank you, Chad, for sporing, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.